Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thanks for facilitating. And first of all, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. Really great to be here. I'm very excited to talk with you today about balancing family and career. Can you have it all? So for those of you who don't know me, and come on, slides. Okay, wait. Okay, you should be seeing the next slide now. Please scream if that is not the case. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Anne Michels and I am COO of Microsoft Austria. Teams, though, is a topic that is very, very close to my heart because, as some of you probably know, I actually led Teams product marketing for the areas core and industry and free version in the last 5 years. I joined the Microsoft Teams team when the product was still very, very young, just 6 months old, and when we still had to knock on doors internally at Microsoft to explain what Teams is and why people should care about Teams. And that has, of course, changed completely, as you all know. But so that's why Teams is really close to my heart, and it's just been great to see Teams Nation grow so much as a conference. I've been working in the tech industry for quite a while, for over 13 years, most of the time with Microsoft as well. But what is actually most important for the session today is that I am also a working mom. I have 2 beautiful daughters, Emma, who just turned 1 year, and Tori, who just turned 3 years. And so they're both very active and smart and young ladies. And so I think there we go. This is actually a picture of me and Tori when she was still very, very little. And when I took her to Microsoft for her to visit Microsoft the first time, she will not remember that picture, of course, but it was a really great memory for me showing her kind of like Microsoft Campus for the first time. And having a 3-year and a 1-year-old means for me that I am really constantly trying to juggle work, life, and family. And I'm pretty sure that many of you on the call are probably in the same position. Some of you might have kids already and are already struggling with this, and others on the call might be thinking about it. And that's exactly what we want to talk about today. How can you balance family and career? Because that is actually a question that you cannot that easily answer. But let me actually start with a question for all the parents on the call. And you can respond in the chat, and I'll read through all your comments later as well. How many of you have felt overwhelmed in the last 6 months? I'll definitely raise my hand to that question. And how many of you have thought, oh gosh, it would be so much easier to take care of my kids if my work wasn't that demanding? I will again raise my hand to answer that question with a yes. And how many of you have thought it would be so much easier to take care of my job if my kids weren't that demanding? So if you answered all of these questions with yes, like I do, then welcome to the club. Because let's be honest, the last 24, actually kind of like now a little bit longer, the last 30 months have really, really been hard for working parents. Because I mean, being a working parent is hard in general. There's no question about that. But then when you add a worldwide pandemic on top of that, you add school and childcare closures on top of that, that is really the perfect recipe for burnout. There is something good, though, about the pandemic and that perspective, because the pandemic has really shone a light on this topic. People have seen it firsthand through video calls specifically, how hard it is to work from home with children. They have seen how much work parents put in every single day. And the pandemic has also shown a light on the expectations that society has of parents. And this has actually led to discussion, to very broad discussions around flexible work schedules, daycare costs, how much should daycare actually cost, and all the other areas where parents are struggling and where parents were already struggling before the pandemic. And this is a good thing, because it is important that we're having these discussions. Something if we talk about it. And it has just become really clear also for people who do not have kids that being a working parent can be challenging. And that question, how do you balance family and a full-time job, is a question that every parent has to ask themselves, and especially women, right? Especially working moms have to ask that question. There are actually a lot of people that believe that the reason there aren't more women in tech is that we are not giving women, especially mothers, the flexibility they need to pursue a career and a family at the same time. So there was a great research or a great survey that the Harvard Business Review did a while ago, which showed that there are a lot of women that choose to put their career on hold at some point when they have a child. It's actually 43% of high qualified women decide to leave their careers or at least take a career break when they have children. And I can confirm you that this is a thought that crosses my mind right now every single day. Especially this winter has been so hard for our family, with like COVID, like cases just going through the roof again, kids being sick in general, but now especially, right, our caregiver right now, for example, both of my kids are at home right now because one daycare is closed because of the caregiver having COVID, and it's been closed for 1.5 weeks right now. The other kid is simply sick with a stomach bug. And I just did the math yesterday. Since September, our kids have been home for over 6 weeks in total. And both my husband and I, right, we work full time. And so it's really difficult. How do you actually make that work? And on top of that, you have actually something what is called the motherhood penalty, which is a phenomenon which I find fascinating, because it is a phenomenon according to which working moms encounter systematic disadvantages in various areas, right? The pay gap is, of course, something that we talk about on a regular basis, and we're all aware of the pay gap between men and women. But the motherhood penalty is a topic that we don't talk about on a regular basis. But it actually goes way beyond the pay gap. Because what the motherhood penalty says, or what the concept says, is that women, mothers, they experience disadvantages, not just when it comes to pay, but also when it comes to hiring and when it comes to their daily job experience. So when you, as a mother, when you apply for a job, your chances of getting that job are lower than when someone applies for that job who has the same qualifications. And it actually gets even worse, because the motherhood penalty does not only have an impact on mothers, but the motherhood penalty has an impact on women in all industries all up. Because it can also affect, or does also affect, women who are childless, but they still face the motherhood penalty. Why? So if you are a woman and you're, let's say, 30 something, right? Let's say 36, 37, and you're married. And you might not even plan to have children, or you don't know yet. But if you fall into that bucket, your employer might still think that you will. They actually very often do. And they penalize you because of that. Of course, that has a lot to do with unconscious kind of like behavior that is happening. But there was a very interesting research done actually fairly recently, just 3 years ago, in Switzerland, in Austria, and in Germany. And as many of you know, right, in these countries, it's very common to put information about your status, marital status, and your children on your resume. And so what they did in that research is that they sent out 9,000 fictional job applications. And what they found out was that women who were married and had older kids, so there was not a big likelihood of them having like small, like deciding to have another baby, they actually got way more callbacks than married women who did not have children. So the companies were penalizing women without children, simply assuming that they might have them in the future. And that is when we talk about this whole topic about, right, parenthood and motherhood. That's why I'm really not surprised that especially women have a lot of concerns about, right, what will a child actually mean for their career. And I've been having that conversation more and more with fathers as well, who are deciding to take more time off than it was common back in the days to really take care of their family. And that was actually the same also for me. When I asked myself, or when I was thinking about having a child, I had that question in my head the whole time. What will that mean for my career? How will I manage? Can I have it all? Can I actually have a child and a successful career? And I bet many of you have the same questions, because especially working in tech, right? An industry that is really known for its fast pace and, well, demanding nature sometimes. And I have a job, and especially a few years ago, I had a job that required me to put in long hours sometimes. I also had to join early morning meetings sometimes, and I also traveled for business on a regular basis. And I'm sure that's also true for many of you. And so I asked myself, how will I do that with a baby? And it seemed like as if there were two worlds, and those two worlds just didn't fit together. And I really didn't know, how can you actually make that work? Can you have a fulfilling career and a rich family life? And for me, that was a very, very important question to answer, because my job, I mean, I love my job, right? I love working in tech. I love working on product. And this was kind of like, for me, it was a substantial threat. And that's exactly what we want to talk about, because I do strongly believe, especially now after having been a mother for over 3 years, that children should not prevent you from being able to pursue a successful career. But how do you actually make that work? How can you have it all? And there are quite a few lessons that I have learned in the last 3 years that I want to share with you. So let's jump into those lessons. The first one is really, and that was the biggest learning for me, absolutely by far the biggest learning, that when you come back from maternity, paternity leave, when you come back, having it all means something completely different when you have a child versus when you don't have a child. And that is a very, very, very important realization. And something that I encourage every young parent and everyone who's thinking about having kids to think about. But because what you define as having it all will be different when you have children. And also, and to some extent, it will also be different for every single person. And for me, that was really a realization that didn't come easy, because when I came back from maternity leave, this is actually me on my first day back from maternity leave. My team surprised me with a picture of Tori that I then put on my laptop. So it was a great first day, but I completely underestimated it, because I tried to go back to my job, and I tried to do everything the way how I did it before. Like, I was asked, do you want to take on a stretch project on my first day? I was like, yes, please, of course. This is exactly what I like to do. And then I realized that things had changed, because I was completely underwater after just 2 or 3 days, right? Because having a child, my priorities had completely changed. Also having a child, my interests had changed. And that really changes how you think about work. For me, one big thing was, for example, business trips, right? Business trips before, I loved them. I loved to go on business trips, loved to go to community events and meet with customers. And when I came back from maternity leave, I just didn't care about that much anymore. Oh, happy hours. I was always the person you would like be able to take on a happy hour after work. When I had Tori, I didn't care about that much anymore. What was more important for me was going back home so that I could spend time with her. And this is really something that I was struggling with, because I felt, so the job that I liked, even some things that I used to like, right? For example, like creating PowerPoint decks on certain topics when you have a child, all of a sudden it can feel meaningless. And I had these moments where I felt like, what am I doing here? Shouldn't I be home full time, spending time with my child? And what really helped me in those moments was to remind myself what I like about my job, what I enjoy about working. And that enabled me to really define what having it all means for me now that I have children. And that all just looks different than how it used to look like before I had children. In addition, of course, your entire life changes when you have a child. I mentioned already, right, that of course you want to spend time with them, but in general also you have to take care of your child, right? There are things that you need to do. So you're much more busy than before having a child. And of course also, well, sleep can always be a challenge, and it definitely still is. So the way how you think about, or the way how I had to think about work-life balance was very different, because all of a sudden work-life balance wasn't work-life balance for me anymore. But work-life balance now became work-life family balance. And of course, that is more difficult because there's an additional kind of like component that you're trying, that you need to fit in. So how do you make sure you have enough time? You have enough time for all these components, for your career, for your life, for yourself, right? And then also for your family. What was really important for me is prioritization. So to make it all work, I need to prioritize. I am now really strict with my time. I have gotten really good at saying no. I actually had a very clear conversation with my manager when I came back from maternity leave on what success looks like. And everything that doesn't fall into that bucket, well, I just stopped doing it. But it's not just the things that I focus on from a work perspective. For me, it was also how I prioritize my time. So I also had to make adjustments to the way how I work. I mentioned earlier, right? Business travel is a thing that I just don't want to go on a business trip for 2 weeks right now anymore. But that does not mean that I don't want to go on business trips at all. When you have small children, it's actually really nice to be in a hotel for 2 days and being able to shower for as long as you want to. But that was, again, also a conversation that I had to have with my manager, because she assumed that I didn't want to go on any business trips after having children. So having that conversation about prioritization and having that conversation about how you envision your work, really your work day as a working parent, especially when your kids are small, is really, really important. And that is something that I really want to encourage everyone to do. What I also had a conversation with my manager about is that I decided, or that I wanted to adjust my hours. So before I would have early morning calls, also sometimes late afternoon calls, because I was pretty flexible. But I have now shifted my schedule, and I stop working at about 4 or 4:30 so that I can actually pick up my kid from daycare. I can spend time with Tori and Emma. And then of course that means that I sometimes have to go back online later at night, because I kind of like shift my working hours, simply to make sure that I can spend more time with my family. So prioritization is extremely important. But what is also important is, when you have children, especially when you have small children, be gentle to yourself. We talked about it at the beginning already. Being a parent, it is hard. And being a parent, a working parent, is even harder, especially if the two of you, if your significant other and yourself, if you both work full-time jobs. There will be days where you will feel like completely exhausted. There will be nights after which you haven't slept at all. There will be weeks like the one we are going through right now, where both kids, or even like if you have 3 kids will be home because daycares will be closed, so they will be sick. And don't be too strict to yourself on these days. Really be gentle to yourself, because that was a big realization for me. It's gonna be messy. No matter what you do, you can have the perfect plan. You can have the perfect backup plan, and the perfect backup plan for the backup plan. With children, you can plan. Things will change and things will get messy. And so this is just really a new reality that I had to adjust to, that I'm not in control of so many things. I'm not control anymore. And this is really something that is, I think, very, very important, because when you think about it, is that when we focus on our career, very often we have very clear goals in mind and clear things that we want to accomplish. And always in the past, when I wasn't able to accomplish those, I kind of like gave myself a hard time. But now I realize that because so many things are out of my control, it is really okay. And I just accept now that I'm not on top of my inbox anymore. I'm not on top of my Teams messages anymore every day. And that is just my new reality. And I hope that once my kids are older, that will change again and I can go back to my zero message approach in Teams. But right now, that is simply not the case. What is also really important and helpful is, of course, to have a supportive employer. And as you all know, I work with Microsoft, and Microsoft is an employer who really, truly cares about working families and about families in general and working parents. And Microsoft as an employer offers really great benefits, which has been so helpful for me. What you see actually here on this picture is a badge, a Microsoft badge, Tori's badge, because we had a Bring Your Kids to Work Day. That was right before the pandemic, where we were still able to do that at scale. And so it's a day that Microsoft used to organize on a yearly basis, actually, where you could bring your kids to work and they could see where you work, and they would do special activities, and you could also get a badge for them. So that's what we did. But it's not just Microsoft. From an employer perspective, who's really who's really family friendly. We've seen that especially in the tech industry, that companies are more and more focused on that topic. Why? Well, because they have realized, right? We all know, in order to attract and retain female talent and to really move the needle when it comes to diversity and inclusion, the tech industry needs to really focus on how can they support families, and specifically how can they support working moms. And so this is something that we've seen in the US, right? And where I was working at that time, paternity and maternity leave is a very different topic than it is in Europe, of course. But we have seen that all the big tech companies are actually now leading the way with really, really generous, in comparison to other companies, generous maternity and paternity benefits, which is really great to see. But how do you deal with the mom and the dad guilt? And this is probably something that you have all experienced as well. I actually just experienced it today because I was at an offsite this morning, and my husband is home dealing with the 2 sick kids, and he's not so happy about that because he was also hoping to be able to at least work a little bit this week, and it's not really happening because I'm not there. So this is something, right, that I struggle with a lot. And for me, this mom or this parent guilt goes in 2 directions, actually. It's on the one hand, the guilt that I sometimes feel that I don't spend enough time with my kids, that I don't spend enough time, that I cannot, right, bring them to bed every single day, that I might not be there every time to pick them up from school, from daycare when they're sick, and so on. That is one thing that I'm struggling with. But for me, this guilt also goes beyond, because when you have a significant other who works full time, for me, it's also the guilt that I feel towards my partner in this moment, my husband, because he's actually the one of us in our relationship who carries the heavier load from a family perspective. And of course, that is challenging for him, but also sometimes challenging for me, because I feel guilty. I want to support him, and I know that he's just carrying the heavier load. And that's how it is in a lot of families. And so how do you deal with that guilt? Because I think we need to all realize that this guilt is there and that we will feel this guilt on certain days. So what has really helped me is the realization that I am in it for the long term, no matter if it comes to my relationship or our family, my marriage, but also, of course, when it comes to my kids. You can simply not always prioritize both work and family. There will be weeks, or there are weeks, where I prioritize work and where I need to prioritize work, right? For example, an offsite, when I'm gone, I'm simply gone, right? But there are also then, of course, weeks where it's the opposite way around, where I prioritize my family and where I will leave early and I will work less hours and I will not feel bad about this. And this has been really, really helpful for me in those moments when I have this mom guilt, this parent guilt, or when I have FOMO, when I have fear of missing out, what's happening, with my family and with my kids. But also it helps me in those moments when I struggle at work because I feel I'm not on top of something because I just didn't have the time to actually drive a project forward last week because I was spending time with my family. But in those moments, I always also remind myself that, well, it is absolutely all worth it simply because I wake up to this every day. These are actually now a little bit more recent pictures of Emma and Tori and Emma in the middle and Tori and Emma on the right side. Emma has now just started to work, so now the two are really trouble. But this is really something that I just remind myself, right? It is hard to be a working parent. There's no question about this. And there will be days where it's really, really hard, especially because sometimes coworkers, right, they just don't know the struggles that you are being faced with as a working parent. And so because of that, they might sometimes not really be supportive in the way as you would like them to be, right? But it's really all worth it because, I mean, we all have wonderful kids, and the time that we spend with our kids is, of course, the most beautiful thing that can happen to you. And that's really, for me, always kind of like when I have those moments where I really struggle, I just really focus on my family, on my kids, and to remind myself, yes, I can have it all, but the all is just really different now that I have kids. And with that, I would actually like to open it up for questions and thoughts, and would love to hear your experience as well. Would love to hear from all of you who have older kids. How are you dealing with kind of like balancing family and career? I would also love to hear if you have any learnings that you can share with me, because I feel I'm still at the beginning of this whole journey of having kids and trying to have a career at the same time, and would just love to hear from you as well.